Interaction is another form of nonlinearity. It involves when two or more independent variables rather than just one. We talked about the assumption that the values of the independent variables do not vary according to the values of the other independent variables, that they were independent of each other. But suppose the value of one independent variable depends on the value of another independent variable. So when there is that interaction between two of the independent variables, this can cause problems with our regression equation. One way to address this is to include in our model the product of those two independent variables that we believe are interacting with each other. When you estimate a model with an interaction term, the first thing that you should look at is the p-value for the product of the two variables. If the product term was not significant, then a reasonable strategy would be to drop the product term from the model and revert to a model without interaction. But if you find that the product term is significant, you need to calculate the effect of these variables of different values of the second variable. So you also have to calculate the effect of it and then interpret. Interaction terms can be used to consider subcategories in models as well that have several dummy variables. And we can think of the coefficient of the product term as the additional effect of the independent variable for the second variable's reference category. So the relationship between the independent and the dependent variable depends on the level of a third variable. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about an interaction model. So what we need to do is we need to find a model that allows for the slopes of that one independent variable to vary over the levels of the control variable. And this is accomplished by using a cross product term. So if we have an equation where we have a plus bx, right? So we have our first variable here, b1 as x1, which is gender, and b2, x2, which is education, and b3, or y, is our liberalism measure. So we believe that gender and education affect how liberal someone is. So we believe that liberalism score is a product of gender and level of education. So we add this cross product piece, our x1 times x2, into our model. So we have a third coefficient here that we create, our third slope. It's the cross product slope. So what we do is we look at regressing each element. So if our equation is a1 plus b1 x1, b2 x2 plus b3 x1, 2, our cross product, and we plug in where x1 equals 0, that's if we have men, then what happens in our equation is everywhere that we would have x sub 1, we put in a 0. And this simplifies our equation for men, that it becomes liberalism is really just the effect of education. We're taking gender out of it, right? So excluding that. So they're eliminated from the question. Our equation for women doesn't simplify quite as much. So what we do is for each x1, we put the value of 1 in. So we've eliminated this cross product by doing that. So we have a plus b sub 1 plus b2 x2 plus b3, that new coefficient, multiplied by x sub 2. And we simplify it, a plus b1 we put together. And then what we're doing is we're taking out the x sub 2 from it and sticking it out here. And because those are in common, that's a simplification of our equation. So if in our equation, our actual equation comes out to be 2 plus b1 x1 plus 2x2 plus 2x, I'm sorry, this should be the number 3, excuse me. So if we plug in males, then we put a 0 everywhere there's an x1, and we end up with a equation for the model of y is equal to 2 plus 2x sub 2. And that's this equation right here. The slope right here represents the slope of the line of the relationship between education and liberalism for men, okay? For women, we do the same thing, and we plug in a 1 in all the places where we had x sub 1, which was our gender variable, and we end up with an equation of y is equal to 5 plus 4x2. So this is our slope for the relationship between liberalism and education for females. So males and females have different lines, one for each gender. So the value of y, liberalism, depends on the value of gender and its connection to with education held constant.